Hashem. Today's Daf Yomi is Chullin Daf Nun Ches, Chullin 58. We're going to start on the bottom line of Nun Zayin Amabez. It's the Daf Yomi for Shabbos Kodesh that we're recording on Friday afternoon. So Amar Amemar taught Hani Beye de Treifa. So there is an animal, a chicken that's a treifa. So the eggs of these chicken, if we know for sure that the animal's a treifa, their eggs that came out from it now there's a distinction. If it was the shichla kama, if this was the first clutch of eggs, that these were the ones that were in the mother already at the time, then she became a treifa. So those are all going to be asira. The Gemara says those are all going to be prohibited, and the reason is because Rashi says the uber yerach imo, the fetus, in this case the eggs, are considered an extension of the mother. The iman nitrafu, so when the mother became treif, they also became treif. Mikan va'ilach, but from that point on, havi le zev gorem. So from that point on, the future eggs, we're going to say that the mother and the male are the ones who combined to make these eggs. So it's two factors that are causing it. So kiva garmin lahem shevo, this and the male are causing the eggs to come. V'davar she'iser, Rashi says, v'davar she'iser v'heter garmulo sheyigdal mutar. And if something that is permitted and prohibited caused it to grow, it's going to be permitted. It's what's called zev v'zegorim, and it's permitted. So this is the teaching of Amemar. So Rav Ashi challenges Amemar from a Mishnah in Tamura, where Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim argue about an offspring of a treifa. That Rabbi Eliezer's position is that you're not allowed to bring the offspring of a treifa as a carbon, and the Chachamim allowed it. So we're on top of Nun Ches Amud Aleph. This is the Mishnah in Tamura that both Rav Ashi and Amemar say v'shavin bebeitzas treifa, even though they argue about the offspring of a treifa, that whether or not it's permitted to be brought as a carbon, as it relates to the eggs of a treifa, they both agree that it's prohibited. Mimnei shegadla beisur, because it was developed in the mother in a prohibited animal. And so therefore we see from here that the offspring of an egg, even after the first clutch, should be prohibited. So the Gemara says, no, hasam bidaspana me'ara. Now that case is different. Why? Because in that case, the eggs were fertilized by the earth, and that's how they gave birth. That's how they grew. And so therefore it's not zev zegorem, it's just one, it's just the male, it's just the female that was involved. There was no male around. And so basically that's how the eggs were produced. So it's not zev zegorem. But if it would be zev zegorem, then it would be permitted. So then the Gemara says, V'lishnale, Bishchakama. Why didn't Amemar say no when Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim agree that it's prohibited? Why didn't he give the answer like you said, that it's the first clutch? And so therefore, since it's the first clutch of eggs, that's why it became prohibited while it's in the mother already. So why didn't they give that answer? So the Gemara says, because the reason why he doesn't want to give that answer, Imkain Gadla Gamrami, by the way. If that's the case, the language of the Mishnah should not have been that it grew in a state of prohibited, but it should have said it was completed in a state of prohibited. So from the fact that it doesn't say Gamra but Gadla, that proves we're not talking about the initial clutch. So the Gemara says, well, how can you say that? So the Gemara says, well, since Amemar explains the Brisa to mean that both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim agree that when they say it's prohibited, that it's talking about chicken, that a hen, that the eggs weren't fertilized by a male, but they just were developed from the dust. So there's only one factor involved. That which it states in the Mishnah, or the Tanya, or it's really a Bryce. So that which it states in the Bryce. So Vlad Treifa, the offspring of a Treifa, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Lo Yikra B'Gabe Mizbeach. Rabbi Eliezer says you can't bring it on the altar because it's treif. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Yikrav. Rabbi Yeshua says that you're able to bring it on the altar. But my kamiflagi, what are they arguing about? You need to say it must be that they're arguing about a case b'shenitrafa, where the animal became treif, ubesof ibra. Aren't we talking about a case where the animal first became treif and then it became pregnant? And so therefore, according to Rabbi Yeshua, it can still be brought because it's zevazegorem. The Rabbi Lezer Savar zevazegorem. Rabbi Lezer says since there are two factors involved, we don't care. Even if there are two factors involved and one is permitted and one is prohibited, we're still going to say it's prohibited. Rabbi Yeshua Savar zevazegorem and mutter. Rabbi Yeshua allows it because he says zevazegorem is mutter. If that's the case, if that's the way you explain their dispute, why are you saying that they have to argue about a carbon? If you say that the offspring of a treif animal, it was zev is permitted, let them argue about a regular animal. The Rabbi Yeshua should say about the regular animal, if it's zev if it's two factors involved, it's permitted. The Gemara says, the reason why it says that the answer is the reason why it says the dispute by a carbon is Rabbi Yeshua to teach us the strength of Rabbi Yeshua's position. That the Rabbi Yeshua allows it even for a carbon. He goes so far as to say Zev Zegorim is permitted even for a carbon. Gemara says V'liflgu a hedjot. And why don't they have the argument about the hedjot, about a regular animal? Well, say Rabbi Lezer even prohibits it by a regular animal. The Gemara says that the Gemara says no. We have this principle koch that adif, that we always like to emphasize the one who is permitting something. This is how Rashi explains it. That the reason Rashi explains Mesechas Beit, so the reason why we say koch te'atera is adif, that the power of leniency is greater because it's possible that the person who prohibits it is only prohibiting it out of a doubt, whereas the person who's permitting it is certain. Mara says umodim bebeitzas treifa shasura b'disapana me'ara, and they both agree that when it says that, and that is where it says that which we learned that they agree that the beitza, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shua agree that the egg of a treif is prohibited. That's b'disfana me'ar. That's where it was not fertilized by a rooster, but from the ground, dechad goramhu. That's only one factor involved, and so therefore that's why they both agree in that case. Rav Achal Savarla. So let's go back. Ameimer's position is that there's a distinction between eggs that were in the mother when it became a treifa, which is going to be prohibited, and the eggs that grew after the fact will be permitted because of zev v'zeh gorem. So Gemara brings machokas amorayim whether or not a treifa is capable of giving birth, and as a result of that, they are going to argue also about the position of Ameimer. Rav Acha Savrak, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, umasni la l'da'ameimer keda'amrit. So Rav Acha holds like Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, who said earlier, we said on the bottom of 57b, that an animal that's a treifa is still capable of giving birth. And so therefore, he's going to explain Ameimer's position, just like we said, that the animal can give birth, even though it's a treifa, and even though it's a treifa, it can give birth. And so therefore, we have to be concerned that maybe that if the animal is a treifa, the eggs are a treifa. And therefore, there's a distinction whether it was a treifa before it became pregnant, before it carried the eggs, or after. But Ravina doesn't think a treifa is capable of giving birth. And so therefore, how is he going to explain Ameimer? And so therefore, he has a different version of what Ameimer will say, because Ameimer's position is, the way we said it, that the hen that is a treifa can still lay the eggs. So Amar Ameimer, according to Ravina, he says Hani by the suffix treifa the shichach kama. So he says these eggs that we're not sure if the hen is a treifa of the first clutch, meaning to say those eggs that we're not sure if it became, that we're in the hen the moment it became treifa, but we're not sure if it's a treifa. So they're a doubtful treifa. So mashina lahu, ihadra vitana. We don't do anything with these eggs. We wait. If the hen will come and produce more eggs, sharian, then we're going to allow these to be eaten. Ve'ilo, but otherwise asirin, they're prohibited. So the Gemara says, Eisrei Rav Ashi la Meimar. So Rav Ashi challenges a Meimar. How could he say that a hen that's treifa will not produce eggs on its own? That didn't we learn in the Mishnah in Tamura that Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim both agree that they argued that Rabbi Eliezer says the offspring of a treifa is prohibited, and the Chachamim say it's permitted. But we said umodim and basis treifa shasurim they should gadol be iser, and they both agree that the treifa of that the eggs of a treifa are prohibited because it grew in the prohibited manner, and so therefore, how could he say that the eggs of a treifa? That how could you say, according to this approach, that there's no eggs for a treifa? So the answer is there. We'd have to say that they're referring to the first clutch. So in came gadol gamar mi, by the way. So why do they use the language of gadol? If it grew, it should say it was completed. So the Gemara says, okay, according to this version, tani gamra, you change it. So the Gemara says, according to Ravina, what do we do with the next Mishnah? Vlad treifa, Rabbi Elazar amar lo yikrav al gabe mizbeach, Rabbi Yeshua or yikrav. So according to this version, the offspring of a treifa, Rabbi Elazar says you can't bring it on the altar. Rabbi Yeshua says you can bring it, but my kamiflagi. What are they arguing about? They're arguing about a case kisha ibra will be sof nitrafa. Aren't they arguing about a case where it became pregnant and then it became treifa? Rabbi Elazar suffer. Elazar says uber yerach imohu. Rabbi Elazar the position that it's just an offspring of the mother, and so therefore, when the mother is treif, they're also the offspring. Rabbi Yeshua suffer uber lavi or yerach ima. That the offspring is not that the uber is not an offspring of the mother. If that's the case, that the mifl will go by a hedgehog. So the same idea. Why are they arguing about the korban? They should argue about the regular. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yeshua to teach us strength of Rabbi Yehuda's position. So the Gemara gives the same answer. Will go by a hedgehog. So the Gemara says, no, koch that terror. But the Gemara says, but both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua both agree that where it's a for sure treifa, but beitas treifa shasur, that the eggs of a treifa are prohibited, but the kama in the first clutch, my taima. What's the reason? Gufay, because it's part of the body, and so therefore Rabbi Yeshua would admit that in that case it's a treifa. The hilchasa, and what's the halacha? How do we conclude? Bezachar, if it will be if it's a male, we call Shnei Masar Chodesh. We wait for 12 months. And if he lives for 12 months, for sure it's not treifa. You don't need to check it. But nekeva, and if it's a female, kol she'ina yoledis. If it doesn't give birth, if it's not able to become pregnant and give birth, then it's a suffix treifa. But if it gives birth, then we're going to say, then you don't need to wait 12 months. It's for sure kosher. Because we say a treifa is not capable of giving birth. So then the Gemara says, Amar Avuna, Kol Birya she'ein bo etzem eino miskayim shnei masar chodesh. Any creature that has no bones, she'ein bo etzem, like worms or different types of insects that they have no bones, they can't last 12 months. So the Gemara wants to know, why do we care? What's the nafkamina? Amar Papa, Shmamina midrafuna, Hadar Shmuel. So we learn from this teaching that which Rav Huna said, that a creature that doesn't have a bone can't live 12 months with respect to the following law. Hadar Shmuel, Kishus sheitliya be'ibea. Let's say you have a gourd or like a squash that became, let's say you have a, one second. Hold on one second. Let's say a squash that became wormy while it's still attached to the ground. So anyway, so he says, so the word ivea is, well, Rashi says, well, it's still attached to the ground. So this cucumber or squash that became wormy while still attached to the ground, asura, the worm is prohibited to eat. Why? Because since it's walking, Rashi says it's going amongst the cucumber, and the cucumber is still attached to the ground. We're calling it shoreitz our aretz kareem. We say that it's crawling on the ground, but if it had been removed from the ground and then it became wormy, the Gemara believed in spontaneous generation. Therefore, the Gemara says it's not considered a sheretz until it leaves it and walks on the ground, and so therefore that's the concept. So therefore, for this reason, we should prohibit the insects that are found on something that's removed from the ground if we don't know when it was created. Out of the concerns that maybe it was created while it's still connected to the ground. But from Rav Huna's teaching, we learn about Hani Tamri Dekada, these dates that became wormy while they're in a jug, and we don't know if they became wormy while they're still attached to the tree, and then it's going to be prohibited, or maybe they became wormy when they're in the jug, and so therefore, and it never crawled on the ground. So therefore, after 12 months, it will be permitted. Because, just to go back a second, prohibition of eating shratzim is only about something that grew from the ground, but it's something that never walked on the ground is not going to be prohibited. And so therefore, technically speaking, if it grew from the ground, it's permitted. So therefore, if you have a insect that you find on a date, if you just kept around that insect for 12 months, it technically speaking will be permitted because it certainly grew after it was created. Because really, if they had been attached to the ground, they would not have lived until now. So the Gemara says, Amarav, Leis-Baka bar Yoma, there's no mosquito or a gnat that's 1 day old because these gnats don't live for a full day. Leis-Didva ba'ashata, and a fly never lives to be a year old because it can never live to a full year. But don't people say Shev Shani Imra Baka Mi Baka? There for 7 years, the female gnat was upset with her husband because the Amrulay, she said to him, Chazito of our Mechoza, you see these people from Mechuza, the Sachabamaya, you see them sunbathing in the water, or bathing in the water, Visalik, and they go out, these nice Geshmak people from Mechuza, we see them bathing, and they're wrapped in their bath towels. These Saftale, Umatusmine, you sat on them and you sucked from them. Lo Dato, you didn't tell me about the delicious dinner we could have had. And so she was mad for 7 years. So we see from here that they can last longer. According to your logic, that's what people say. Shitim money parzala tole labaka b'course. There is a weight of 60 mana of iron that the gnat carries on his little hammer, meaning to say when the gnat bites a person to suck his blood, he takes out of him so much. Mika iu gufe kameav. The whole weight of the gnat is not that. Ela b'mine didayu. So we have to translate it that it sucks out 60 times the amount in his own weight. In mosquito years, it was 7 years. She was mad at him for 7 years. It felt like 7 years for the husband gnat, but really it wasn't. So the Gemara says, what about an extra animal? Tanan awesome behema balas chamesh raglayim. Let's say an animal we learned about an animal that's missing an organ. What about if it has an extra one? Let's say an animal has 5 limbs, which if it has only 3, I raise them mum. And so therefore it's a defect and it's disqualified as a carbon. But that implies it's disqualified as a carbon, but it could be eaten. When do we say this idea that you could eat it only when it has an extra foot or missing a foot of a forearm of a chaser v'yasser b'ragel, but if we're missing the back leg, treifa nami it's a treifa. My timer, call yasser kinatul dami. If you have an extra leg, it's like it's missing one. and so therefore it's a treifa. He chevasa. There was one animal. The havile tarte sanya divi. It had two of these parts of the stomach that the wolves hate, which we discussed earlier. I see Ravina v'tarfa. Ravina says treif. Midirav Huna, from this position of Rav Huna, that an extra limb is going to be considered like it's missing a limb. But if the two parts of the stomach flow into each other, then we're going to say it's kshera. It's not an extra one. There was an incident with a piece of meat or a strip of meat that was coming out from the stomach. So Rav Ashi Mitrafei wanted to say it's treifa. All those animals that are grazing in the field outside the city, they all have this. This is common amongst the animals. So he basically said it's kosher. There was another strip of flesh that was going from one stomach to the other. So he had an extra piece. He thought to make it's kosher because that's maybe the way the animals grew in that area. You want to look at everything together, meaning to say you have to draw a distinction. Only where we had a tradition that it grows like that is it going to be okay. So Nassim Bar Shila, who is the top butcher of Tzipori, he testified with Rebbe. This is the second time we have him in our chapter, in our tractate. He said, he said about two intestines that came out of the animal like one, that it is a treifa. And also, if these two went out of the korkavan, it's kashera. When do we say this? When they go out in two places, one on the top and one in the middle. But if they go out in the same place, and they then go back together, kshera, then it's kosher. One of them was kosher only on the condition that they became mixed together. Even if they didn't become mixed together. It makes sense according to one that says that they mixed together. That's why it says like the finger. What does it mean until the finger? So Gemara says until the bottom finger, meaning close to the rectum, so that it goes out from one place. Rabbi Yehuda says if the down feathers, the ones closest to the skin, were removed, then it's going to be disqualified. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shmuel said the same thing. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shmuel, that the feather, if it's missing, can be combined to make a pigo amount. So we see from here that's going to be considered like the skin, like Rabbi Yehuda. Amarava Domaloi. Maybe it's not the case. I can't come Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe only says by treifa because there's nothing that protects it. But with respect to pigol, karabanan sphere. Maybe it holds like the rabbanan. But with respect to treifa, it doesn't provide protection. Okay, so we'll stop here. This is today's daf, the daf for Shabbos. Baruch Hashem, I'll try to find time on Sunday to do it with everybody, even though I'll be traveling.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Thank you.